In Japan, there are no Yakuza groups stronger than the Yamaguchi Gumi. Possessing hundreds of millions of dollars from their illegal activities, they've grown from a gang of dock workers into a national crime syndicate. Smart leadership has made the Yamaguchi Gumi Japan's and perhaps Asia's strongest criminal enterprise. In spite of their infamy, they're able to operate openly, freely naming leaders in the organization to the public, and even possessing their own theme song. This is the full story of the Yamaguchi Gumi and the Yakuza. With Japan's growing industry, unskilled labor was needed, whether it be in the coal mines or at Japan's growing number of canals and harbors. In the harbor of the growing industrial city of Kobe, one of the recent arrivals from the rural areas was hired as a bouncer for the shipping yards in the city in 1912. This man, Yamaguchi Harukichi, would later begin working for the boss of the Kobe canal system, Oshima Hideyoshi, who ran his own group known as the Oshima Gumi or Oshima Group. Oshima provided labor for the canals and shipping industries, and also provided protection. Oshima was also tied into the organized crime figure and politician Yoshida Yusokichi. If you think politicians these days are bad, at least they aren't Yakuza bosses. Yamaguchi quickly assembled about 50 longshoremen to his new group that he was establishing. On the door of his home, a placard stating Yamaguchi Gumi was hung in 1915. Under Oshima's influence, Yamaguchi grew in power, providing manpower to the docks and also making advances into the entertainment industry, the Rokyoku genre in particular. By 1925, he had grown in influence, but he never left Oshima's umbrella. Yamaguchi Harukichi retired and handed over control to his 23-year-old son, Noboru. If you've ever worried about parental expectations, imagine taking over as a wharf gang boss when you're 23. Yamaguchi Noboru was a short, squat man with a little Charlie Chaplin mustache. In spite of his odd appearance, he proved to be a deeply intelligent man, and one with ambitions. He expanded Yamaguchi Gumi's involvement in the shipping industry, but also in the entertainment sectors. They got involved in Kobe's entertainment districts, music, and even sumo. In fact, one of his talents was making connections and friends with people, one of them being the influential sumo wrestler Tamanishiki Sannemon and entertainment boss Nagata Sadao, both of whom became his sworn brothers. Organized crime and nationalist groups grew during this period, existing as organized societies operating in the open. One of the fastest growing in Kobe was naturally the Yamaguchi Gumi, even making close ties with Yoshimoto Kogyo, which at the time was a traditional theater and talent agency largely focused around comedy. This didn't sit well with Oshima and the other major movers he was associated with. Exactly what happened is unknown, but there was some sort of an issue with Yoshimoto Kogyo, the other politician who was also an organized crime leader. Yes, there was two. Hora Asanosuke sent some men after Noboru, which resulted in serious wounds. The group that Hora Asanosuke was associated with later became the Goda Ikka, who are still warring with the Yamaguchi Gumi to this day. That's an almost 80-year beef. Yamaguchi Noboru's wounds proved too much, and in 1942, at the age of only 41, he passed away. During this time, it was harder than ever for the Yamaguchi Gumi to make money. The war situation was getting bad for Japan, but things were even worse for Yamaguchi Gumi. There was no successor to the group. For 4 years, Yamaguchi Gumi remained without a leader and began to wither away as the world changed. They would need new, bold leadership to survive the world created in the aftermath of the Second World War. Following the sudden passing of Yamaguchi Noboru, the organization was left without a leader. As the situation worsened in Japan, the organization rotted away to some 30 members at its lowest point. But not to worry, its most loyal member was still around, though he had just gotten pardoned for a murder charge. This figure had been in and out of prison and seemingly never managed to find the right path in life. He was volatile and known as Kuma, or Bear, because of his fighting style, where he would claw at his opponent's eyes. Taoka, Kazuo. He was beaten by his alcoholic father as a child, couldn't hack it at the docks, and was now just getting out of prison for a murder charge. But as checkered as his legal history was, Taoka was ready for leadership. His life as a petty criminal and bodyguard was coming to an end with the arrival of the new post-war Japan. And though the war had ended, the suffering hadn't fully stopped. Japan was a burnt-out husk. People were starving and dying all the time, and the police were simply unable to deal with the chaotic situation in the country. Crime rates were soaring. Beyond the numerous crimes of desperation committed by the starving, several wild crimes occurred, ranging from poisonings to rob banks or random slashings. Each day, thousands of demobilized soldiers were returning home to a Japan that couldn't afford them work. Ethnic Koreans and Taiwanese also proved to be troublesome for the government and the Japanese people. The ethnic Koreans, of which there were around 2 million at that time, were biased in favor of the Japanese Communist Party for perhaps understandable reasons, and those who weren't were increasingly dominating Japan's black markets. Local gangsters and the foreigners were now fighting in the streets for those markets. Food, alcohol, guns, and even drugs. All was on the market for sale. In this new Japan, everything was for the taking. Taoka understood this, and under his leadership the Yamaguchi Gumi would go from being a 30-man strong gang on the docks of Kobe to a massive criminal organization raking in millions each year. In quick order, Taoka established a vigilante committee, both to keep peace in his part of Kobe and also to keep the Koreans out. Being one of the few capable men left, at the age of only 33, Taoka Kazuo had become the head of the Yamaguchi Gumi. Though in his youth he was a sort of senseless criminal always seeking the quick money, he had come to realize that he needed to aim for enterprises. These could be revenue streams that would provide far more cash for far less risk. Why risk a lot for a small-time robbery when you could simply control parts of the Japanese economy? Beyond the Kobe harbor, which he immediately sought to take control of, Taoka set his sights on a totally new form of cash, keirin, bike race betting. Since 1948, betting on bicycle racing had been legalized in Japan. This was joined by motorcycle racing, horse racing, and later boat racing. All four together would become Japan's only legal form of gambling. Naturally, organized crime flocked to these enterprises. In and around Kobe, 3 new bike tracks for gambling were established. At the Kobe track, the various criminal gangs, including the Yamaguchi Gumi and the Odoshima Gumi, sought to take control of different parts of the event, the stalls, the bike managers, and so on. Naturally, all of them wanted to control the security for the venture as well. Shimichi Yukio, who headed his own gang under the Yamaguchi Gumi umbrella, forced control of the track's security over to his group. In revenge, a group associated with the Nishikai Gumi broke into Shimichi's home and attempted to get rid of him. Instead, he fought them off, finishing off one of his attackers in the assault. A few days later, Shimichi and his men kidnapped the Nishikai Gumi's Wakagashira, essentially their second in command. Shimichi brought the kidnapping victim to the Nishikai Gumi's boss and negotiated a new agreement, when they handed over security of the Kobe's track to him, and by that virtue, to the Yamaguchi Gumi. By 1954, Yamaguchi Gumi had muscled its way into being the top gang in Kobe, and was growing in power all over the greater Kansai region, taking over harbors and pleasure districts. However, a much more interesting story was starting to play out. Since 1948, a child singer, Misoto Hibari, had been growing in popularity, starting to star in well-received motion pictures, and by 1953, Taoka, who was naturally also involved in Japanese motion pictures, had become something of a confidant for her. Taoka saw something in Misoto that a few others saw. For the most part, she had to force her way into the music industry by sheer force of talent. Unlike them, he backed her to the hilt, and provided whatever support he could for her. This young girl was not going to be just a popular starlet, it was going to become a generational talent, whose name is still well remembered to this very day. Naturally, if Taoka wanted to take the budding starlet to the next level, he needed to get her to work with the biggest young male actor at the time, Tsuruta Koji. However, Tsuruta's manager declined and openly flaunted Taoka. What happened next was perhaps one of the most violent and public attacks on a celebrity in Japanese history. While Tsuruta and a number of stars were eating at a ryokan, fans stood outside and waited for signatures from the stars. A group of Yamaguchi Gumi members who were there demanded that Tsuruta do signatures, but the stars went to dinner instead. One of the Yamaguchi Gumi members, Yamamoto Kenichi, walked up to Tsuruta and bashed him in the head with a whiskey bottle, following it up with a brick. Because you know, people just carry bricks in their pockets, right? Afterwards, Tsuruta worked with Misoto Hibari, and his manager turned up dead in 1955. Convenient. By 1958, Yamaguchi Gumi's Taoka was handling Misoto Hibari's security and had her signed to Kobe Genosha, a talent agency that was openly operated by Yamaguchi Gumi. As the 50s rolled on, the Yamaguchi Gumi grew stronger each and every day, expanding now even into sports. With 2 solid streams of revenues, entertainment, and the harbors, Yamaguchi Gumi was richer and stronger than ever. But Taoka wasn't satisfied with dominating just these 2 businesses. He wanted to take over the whole of the Japanese underworld. Yamaguchi Gumi began to spread out all over Japan, integrating a number of gangs into their organization and starting wars with others. Soon, Yamaguchi Gumi had expanded from Kyushu up to Tokyo. It took a lot of violence to achieve these victories, however, including a sting of a boss on a high-speed train and a shootout in a club that almost put Misoto Hibari and her 2 brothers in the crosshairs. The government of Ikeda Hayato attempted to calm the streets, ordering a crackdown on the gangs in the lead-up to the 1964 Olympics. This didn't work. In fact, the gang wars got worse, with the Yamaguchi Gumi affiliate sabotaging an attempt to form a Yakuza, far-right underground army to stand against communism as dreamt up by fixer Kodama Yoshio. During this time, the second of the three gang wars that rocked Hiroshima occurred. In general, partly because of how bloody these wars that Yamaguchi Gumi helped kick off in the south were, Yakuza gangs in Kyushu and Chugoku were often smaller in number but more radical in approach. By 1965, the police had enough of the gangs. They implemented the First Summit strategy. The police selected 10 gangs, the Yamaguchi Gumi among them, and focused their efforts on destroying the gangs. They hoped that sheer pressure would be enough to collapse the gangs and bring an end to street violence. In quick succession, gangs started to dissolve themselves, unable to take the heat. Not all of these were major gangs, but some of the cops' main targets, such as the Nihon Kokusai Kai or Sumiyoshi Kai, dissolved themselves under the pressure. Yamaguchi Gumi's gangs under them also folded at an alarming rate, and they were increasingly losing control of the harbors. Now, one of Yamaguchi Gumi's major streams of revenue was simply gone. Imagine overnight that half of your salary just disappeared into thin air. Now the cops started to look into Taoka Kazuo's involvement in the entertainment biz, and the gang's top ranks started to begin fighting among themselves. Taoka himself was looking at no less than 3 major charges by the end of the 1960s. It's no surprise then that Taoka was incredibly stressed at this time. He complained constantly of stomach ailments and was frequently hospitalized, even suffering a heart attack in 1965. This pressure never let up. Taoka was never as free nor as powerful as he was before the First Summit strategy. Now he had to contend with powerful leaders under him, and could no longer command as much respect. Though, the gangs kept growing, and the money kept flowing. With the lack of a powerful tool like RICO, gangs rebuilt themselves, but this new gang style was even more bloody and even more wild. It was no longer the era of knives on the waterfront. It was M16s and hand grenades, a true changing of the eras. And to his credit, Taoka realized that this was incredibly negative. He said that now Yakuza had to focus themselves on the legal businesses more, that they had to read the financial newspapers. His idea of a Yakuza was far closer to its roots as so-called men of honor on the waterfront, just to change your venue. His desire for mainstream or legal status grew stronger with the passage of time, and soon he was working on serialized stories about his life, writing an autobiography, and working as an advisor on Yakuza films. This is Japan, remember, so none of this was considered snitching. In fact, until recently, it was common for Yakuza to collaborate with the authorities on some occasions, sometimes to get preferential treatment. Also, the Yakuza pretty routinely publish who their leaders are and the various positions within their gangs, so their approach on what snitching is diverges very heavily from ours. During his life, starting in the early 70s, a total of 6 films about him would be made while he was alive. The first, a film entitled Yamaguchi Sandaime, which translates to something like the third leader of the Yamaguchi Gumi, was based on Taoka's writings. With much effort, Taoka's Yamaguchi Gumi survived. They went from the harbors to the high-rises, becoming pop culture idols whose murders were celebrated on the silver screen. But the Japanese gangland wars continued unabated. The Third War in Hiroshima proved to be bloody, and the now returned to Okinawa, flushed with supplies left over on American bases after Vietnam, were filled with bloody battles for their streets. Even the neighboring Osaka proved deadly. The Yamaguchi Gumi assassinated the head of a rival gang there under the leadership of the Matsuda Gumi. In response, a war broke out between Yamaguchi Gumi affiliates in Osaka and the Matsuda Gumi forces there. Taoka's growing distaste for illegality would soon be proven correct when he visited a club called Bellamy one night in 1978. As soon as the Song and Limbo show finished, a 26-year-old member of the Matsuda Gumi named Narumi Kiyoshi rose from his seat and fired 2 shots into Taoka before fleeing. Taoka was dead. Or so Narumi thought. In truth, the bullets passed through his neck, missing anything major. Instead, 2 unrelated individuals were seriously wounded in the attack. With Taoka safely in the hospital recovering, the Yamaguchi Gumi was on the warpath. The militant leader of its hawks and number 2 of the gang, Yamamoto Kenichi, sprang forth and delivered a punishment that Osaka would not soon forget. Over the course of 2 months, 7 members of the Matsuda Gumi were shot down in broad daylight. The assassin, Narumi Kiyoshi, was discovered rolled up in plastic wrap. Within 4 months, the Yamaguchi Gumi had declared victory, and Taoka was out of the hospital. Though he made an effort to announce the ending of the Yamaguchi Gumi to the media in a press conference, it was clear that a tiger would never change its stripes. With his body ruined from smoking and drinking, covered in scars from knives and bullets, Taoka's health finally gave way in 1981. unexpectedly dying of a heart attack at the age of 68. Yamaguchi Gumi's second in command, its Wakagashira, Yamamoto Kenichi, was behind bars and couldn't be made the boss yet. Before that day could come, Yamamoto died of liver disease and kidney failure. Now, the Yamaguchi Gumi hadn't just lost its best leader, it had no leader at all. Lacking any obvious successors, now the Yamaguchi Gumi was going to suffer its greatest challenge yet: civil war. The Yamaguchi Gumi's boss and his successor were gone. Now, without an obvious successor, things were going to get chaotic. Already at the funeral behind the scenes, there was jostling for position. The widow of Taoka, Taoka Fumiko, wanted to make Yamamoto Hiroshi the acting Wakagashira of the Yamaguchi Gumi. This was rejected by Yamamoto. He was holding out for a better position. Eventually, Yamamoto Hiroshi was declared the acting boss of the Yamaguchi Gumi, despite claiming that he didn't need a Wakagashira. Takenaka Masahisa, another high-ranking member of the Yamaguchi Gumi, was convinced by Taoka Fumiko to serve as Wakagashira. Takenaka was known as a brute of a man who knew little more than force. He had come up impoverished, losing his brother to police torture and his parents after the war. Takenaka had spent most of his life stealing or beating people. Yamamoto was from a fairly normal family and had served in the IJN during the World War. He was recruited by Taoka for his excellent work on the docks. In essence, the polar opposite of Takenaka. There was a lot of nonsense I had to cut out of the story thus far. There was a lot of back and forth, and neither side was happy with the situation. A few days after getting Takenaka to become Wakagashira, Takenaka opposed formally, making Yamamoto the boss of the group, at first privately, and then publicly. His refusal held Yamamoto up, and kept him in a largely powerless provisional role. Now the outside media was starting to notice, and eventually the conflict between the two sides would become the most televised gang war in Japanese history. Soon, Takenaka had assembled a coalition of supporters, even Taoka Fumiko herself. Yamamoto and his supporters tried to get Inogawa Kai leader Inogawa Kakuji to intervene on his behalf, but Inogawa rejected the request. By June of 1983, the situation had turned against Yamamoto Hiroshi and his supporters, once Takenaka was released from pretrial detainment on a tax evasion charge. On June 5th, 1983, Takenaka was publicly announced as the head of the Yamaguchi Gumi with the support of many top-level syndicate leaders and Taoka family members. A little over a week later, Yamamoto Hiroshi and his supporters formally left the Yamaguchi Gumi and formed their own group, Ichiwa Kai. All of this was done through press conferences that were broadcast nationally, with gang bosses even giving interviews on the ongoing war. Japan's eyes had become transfixed on the growing tension between the two sides, and it wanted every piece of information about the gory show as soon as it went down. 2 months after the announcement of the new group, a leading member of Ichiwa Kai was snuffed out in a gambling den. The war had begun. Initially, Yamaguchi Gumi under Takenaka was well served by his ferocious strategy. Takenaka would make one fatal mistake by underestimating his enemies. Ichiwa Kai weren't slouches, and they were just watching his moves and waiting for a moment to strike.
Yamaguchi Gumi 4代目竹中組長が狙撃されたのは先月1月26日夜のことである。この日、竹中組長は京都の病院に田岡未亡人を見舞った足で午後9時過ぎに愛人の住む吹田市のマンションに着き、ロビー奥のエレベーターの前に立った。この時、竹中組長が引き連れていたのは常に行動を共にする山口組のナンバー2で高知に本拠を構える豪遊会の中山勝正会長、南組の南勉組長の2人で、南組長はボディーガードとしてピストルを所持していた。この3人に対する狙撃は一瞬にして終わった。ロビーに隠れていた4人の男が飛び出し、至近距離からピストルを立て続けに発射。中山会長は顔と背中、それに腹部に銃弾を受けて即死。南組長も頭に弾を受けて即死した。一方、竹中組長はピストルを振り払おうとしたのか、右手の薬指を飛ばされ、胸と腹に銃弾を受けた。しかし竹中組長はよろけるようにマンションの外へ出た。銃声を聞 聞いた組長の運転手が重傷の組長を車に乗せ一目散に現場を立ち去った。この時車は狙撃グループのリーダー格で一話会系山広組内同心会会長長野修一を跳ね飛ばして走り抜けた。
Takenaka passed away the following day. Now, Yamaguchi Gumi had lost its leader and his second in command, yet again. Yamaguchi Gumi was quick to appoint Nakanishi Kazuo, a man who would come up in the youth gangs, to the temporary leadership position. His temporary wakakashira was decided to be Watanabe Yoshinori, a man who fit the militant approach of the Yamaguchi Gumi during the war. Watanabe had risen up under Yamamoto Kenichi, the original successor to Taoka. During his time under Yamamoto, he took part in the Osaka War and was in and out of jail since the late 60s. As Yamamoto Kenichi's successor, he became the leader of the powerful and militant Yamaken Gumi. Watanabe didn't seem to be the best in terms of intelligence, but he knew violence, and he had the look of a proper Yakuza leader. Kishimoto Saizo, an important senior member of the Yamaguchi Gumi, made an announcement that implied revenge would be quick to come. And sure enough, it was. The following day, the Yamaguchi Gumi kidnapped a senior gang leader of the Ichiwakai and beat the whereabouts of Takenaka's assailants out of him. They also forced him to send a letter announcing the disbandment of his gang to the police and an apology to Yamaguchi Gumi headquarters. That very same day, 2 Ichiwakai members were gunned down. This followed for the rest of the month, with the Yamaguchi Gumi attacking numerous Ichiwakai members and even rubbing out an uninvolved son of one senior member. The following month, an express delivery was used to get the door open to one of Ichiwakai's HQs, and the member who opened the door was taken out. More Ichiwakai members were abducted and forced to phone the police, telling them that their gangs were dissolving themselves. When the abducted members attempted to refute the coerced message, they were hunted down. Only one of them survived. Over the course of 2 months, the heat had gotten so heavy on Ichiwakai that they were holed up like rats and lacked the ability to take revenge. Soon, Yamaguchi Gumi was firing into buildings in an attempt to get at their cornered targets. The situation had gotten so bad that Ichiwakai affiliate gangs had begun to defect back to Yamaguchi Gumi. As the weeks and months passed on, the war continued at a less frantic pace, but still bloody all the same. The Yamaguchi Gumi had even tried driving a dump truck into Yamamoto Hiroshi's house, but were stopped by police guarding the building. These cops were wounded in the ensuing fight, and as a result, Yamaguchi Gumi released a message stating that if somebody hurt police or civilians, then they would be removed from the gang. This represented a new issue that they had to deal with. The overall level of violence had gotten too high for Yamaguchi Gumi to act freely. People were angry at the Yakuza. They had brought open violence to the streets of a country that, truthfully, was not used to that kind of violence out in public. Social movements of people taking aim at the gangs emerged, demanding that they remove their headquarters from certain areas and that they be kept out of society at large. These gangs were even forcibly removed from most of the legalized sports betting that they had fought so hard to obtain back in the 1940s and 50s. This was the start of a wider trend in legislation against organized crime groups in Japan. Soon it would become functionally impossible to be an open gang member in Japan anymore. Really sad, I know. Amid all the chaos and bloodshed, in 1989, the 2 rival gangs declared an end to the conflict. Ichiwakai dissolved themselves shortly thereafter. Though Yamaguchi Gumi had obviously won, it lost many of its best members, both via imprisonment and gangland warfare. While a number of Ichiwakai members went back to the Yamaguchi Gumi, it could never replace the members in respect that the organization had lost. After narrowly avoiding yet another civil war, Nakanishi Kazuo, who had been the temporary leader of the group, resigned in favor of Watanabe Yoshinori. However, Watanabe wasn't in an easy position. Scrutiny was higher than ever on Japanese organized crime, and public violence had to be discouraged. Thus, Watanabe's goal had to be to restore Yamaguchi Gumi's respect in the eyes of the public and get it more sources of revenue. And now, in the late 80s, the bubble was in full swing. Japan was ripe for the taking, just like in the 1940s. Men working to fleece large companies and landowners began to come out of the woodwork in the 80s. Now, land speculation could be added to that list of crimes that Yamaguchi Gumi was taking part in. While Yamaguchi Gumi had gotten involved in other emerging businesses such as adult entertainment, including stuff that is illegal in most of the world, thankfully, the war had taken not just their attention away from their investments, but their resources as well. For every 100 yen spent on weapons, it was 100 yen taken away from from investments and further empire building. They were behind, and now they would need to try adapting to a more media-conscious atmosphere. At first, a more peaceful existence wasn't going to be possible. The syndicate had a number of wars that it would fight in the late 80s. By 1991, most of these conflicts had been negotiated to peace, or resulted in an overwhelming victory. This included the so-called Nagoya dispute, which lasted less than a month before Yamaguchi Gumi affiliated Kodokai, led by an ambitious leader named Tsukasa Shinobu, crushed their opponents and won total victory, winning control of Nagoya. But 1991 didn't just bring a possibility for a renewed focus on money-making, it also brought the beginning of the end of Japan's prosperity with the lost decade. The bubble popped, tanking land speculation that Yamaguchi Gumi were likely involved in and put the Japanese economy on a path towards economic stagnation. Now, the double whammy, the Boryokudan Taisaku Ho, or the anti-Yakuza law. First put into effect in 1992, the law heavily restricted the actions of organizations declared Yakuza. Some of these were obvious activities, but others were mostly legal ventures that the Yakuza were now restricted from, including land speculation. Now, their legal ventures would increasingly be unable to finance their illegal ventures. Watanabe, also known as Mr. Gorilla, was a man who hadn't went to high school. He was now in charge of an organization that would need smart and subtle leadership. While there's only so much we know about his leadership given how recent his time in charge was, it was likely less than satisfactory. However, there was a bright spot, sort of. The Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995 proved to be an awful tragedy, taking the lives of over 6,000 people. Okay, so not much of a bright spot. But in the aftermath, the first group distributing aid and helping victims was the Yamaguchi Gumi, of all people. For whatever reason, they were able to mobilize and provide aid faster than the government. For the first time in well over a decade, the Yamaguchi Gumi had good press, and was intent on continuing this process. The Yakuza engaged in similar practices after the tsunami in Fukushima. This, alongside their Halloween activities, have been a major part in trying to soften the image of gangs in Japan. In some areas of Japan, mostly Kobe, Yamaguchi Gumi's presence is generally not considered a malignant entity the same way they are in Osaka, so to some degrees, their efforts have paid off. All this good press was almost immediately counteracted in 1997, however. Exactly why this happened, we don't know, but it's likely that the boss, Watanabe, had some level of friction with his Wakagashira, Takumi Masaru, this enmity potentially stemming from a mediation that Takumi had worked out. Takumi was also deeply involved in reorganizing Yamaguchi Gumi and was understood to have control over the purse strings. While preparing to have a meal with several executive members of Yamaguchi Gumi, he was ambushed at the Shin Kobe Oriental Hotel. Takumi and an innocent bystander were taken out in a spray of bullets. It was a reminder of the Yamaguchi Gumi's old days. No matter how much effort it put into presenting itself as a noble enterprise, the truth was that it was a malignant and violent organization dedicated to harming people for profit. The Yakuza and Yamaguchi Gumi as a whole will likely never be able to shake that. The police enacted a new summit strategy which resulted in several arrests, including an important Yakuza figure in the Kodokai, Tsukasa Shinobu. The courts also made their own moves, stemming from the shooting of a plainclothes policeman in 1995. In 2003, the courts announced that Watanabe was liable as an employer of the shooters. Watanabe wasn't going to be held criminally responsible, but he would be forced to pay 80 million yen in restitution. And what happened next is up for debate. Some people have described it as a coup against Watanabe, and that seems to be what happened. Once again, because this is so recent and the players involved are still active in the Yamaguchi Gumi affairs, we don't know the particulars. In 2004, Watanabe announced that he was entering a long period of rest. Despite suffering pretty serious legal problems that cost him over 2 billion yen in bail, Tsukasa Shinobu was made the Wakagashira, the number 2 of the Yamaguchi Gumi in 2005. He was then almost immediately elevated to the position of Kumicho, boss. Tsukasa is an interesting figure. He was born and raised in Kyushu, having a normal life. He even worked a normal office job before moving to Nagoya. For whatever reason, in 1962, he joined the Yamaguchi Gumi affiliate organization known as the Hirota Gumi, before ultimately forming his own Kodokai. Tsukasa dresses fancy, but generally keeps quiet and low-key. He seems to be a generally astute but strict leader. Over time, his Kodokai navigated through the bloody 80s and became one of the largest affiliate gangs in the Yamaguchi Gumi outside of the Yamaken Gumi of Kobe. As you'll recall, the Yamaken Gumi was previously led by Yamamoto Kenichi and then Watanabe. They never really got over the fact that Tsukasa Shinobu, some guy from Nagoya, was the leader and that he potentially ousted their Watanabe to become leader. Even worse for Yamaken Gumi, Tsukasa's Wakakashira was his successor to the Kodokai, Takayama Kiyoshi. The Yamaken Gumi had been fully alienated from the group's executive leadership. Tsukasa would oversee an organization that was increasingly focused on non-violent but still illegal ways of making money. Scams such as the infamous Ore Ore Sagi, or the use of stolen credit cards to withdraw from ATMs en masse, appeared more common in Japan. Fraud against major companies, various stock schemes, and money laundering has become part and parcel of this new Yakuza and Yamaguchi Gumi. That isn't to say that they were no longer a violent threat, of course. The Yamaguchi Gumi was making serious inroads into Tokyo against the Sumiyoshi Kai in the early 2000s, but these activities were going to take place more underground and in more furtive ways. In late 2005, Tsukasa was sentenced to prison for 6 years as part of legal charges that he received in the late 90s. While in prison, he received special treatment, including a private cell and a work assignment in the prison's hospital ward. Many of the people there didn't recognize him and would sometimes chat with the crime lord as though he was just another inmate. In 2011, he was released. But the Japan he was coming into was different than the Japan he was used to, one that was going to be even harder for the Yakuza to operate in. In 2011, Fukuoka Prefecture implemented Yakuza exclusion ordinances. These ordinances quickly spread to other parts of Japan. What these ordinances are and what they do depends on the area, but they tend to be quite restrictive on Yakuza members and those associated with them. In fact, Tokyo's law takes aim at people who attend parties with Yakuza, eats with them, or golfs with them. The law in some areas is so strict that Yakuza members have been arrested for having point cards at supermarkets. Kinda odd, but I get what it's trying to do. The Yakuza's involvement in legal industries was being stamped out permanently. Tsukasa did his best to adapt to this new Japan, likely involving himself increasingly in scams and other online activity. He probably has no clue how any of this works given his age, but it would make him money, so he would be a fan. Something Tsukasa is also a fan of is music and karaoke. That's why he released an original song soon after being released from jail. The song he released was given the utterly North Korean title of Single-Minded Chivalry, Tsukasa Shinobu Is Our Lives. It's believed that he was also the one singing it on the recording, which does sound nice, but it shows some bad signs if the boss is singing praises of himself. There's another civil war. In August of 2015, numerous affiliate organizations withdrew from the Yamaguchi Gumi, most notable being the Ikeda Gumi and the Yamaken Gumi. Their new organization was called the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi. Yeah, not too creative. They had something like 6,000 members to Yamaguchi Gumi's approximately 14,000 members. This civil war was far less violent than the civil war of the 80s, to the point where there's only been a few bodies over the course of almost a decade. In fact, it's fair to say that the various splits and movements of gangs away from the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi have been more momentous. In 2017, a group split from the rebels, calling themselves Kisinakai. They were joined in 2024 by Ikeda Gumi as a new independent organization. The peak of hilarity of the war was when Yamaken Gumi, whose friction with Tsukasa's Kodokai was likely one of the things that helped start the war, defected back to the mainline Yamaguchi Gumi. As of 2024, Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi has an estimated 400 members, with Yamaguchi Gumi having just over 7,000 members. You're probably noticing that the numbers have fallen a lot. In fact, since 1992, the numbers of estimated Yakuza members have fallen from about 91,000 to just over 20,000 members. The decreasing trend began in 2004, but since 2010, the trend really sped up. There has been some talk of the concept called mafiaization, where a number of discharged members are actually active members and continue their criminal enterprises just without having to deal with the restrictive laws in Yakuza. If you aren't a member of a Yakuza organization, then none of the restrictions apply to you. Suddenly, you can get a supermarket point card. While researching for the video for a brief period, I thought that the mafiaization concept was perhaps a real thing. But if you look at the numbers, it's kind of hard to argue that it exists as a large-scale phenomenon. The Japanese crime rate has collapsed since 2014, with a slight uptick in 2023, seemingly related to cybercrime and fraud. Most of these crimes rely on small groups of men, and there may be a Yakuza handler involved on some level, but you only need one or two guys handling things, maybe a few guys on the inside of the operation. The Yakuza can't be the entire Japanese crime rate, so they're obviously dropping guys like flies. The ex-Yakuza guys aren't going underground, they're mostly going legit. Because, I mean, if you aren't a member of a criminal organization and you aren't committing crimes, do you count as a criminal? I don't think so. The Yakuza has been implicated in arms trafficking recently, and there's been some chatter about their involvement in criminal rings that were organized online, but these events were disproportionately small in scale and number compared to what you might expect from a massive gang in the shadows. They aren't really involved in the drug game either, largely leaving that to Chinese gangs to import the product. As of 2024, Yamaguchi Gumi is a far different organization than in 1982 or 1915. It's smaller, more secretive, and focused more on complex money schemes than the old-fashioned shakedowns. The group's leader, Tsukasa Shinobu, is a venerable 82 years old. He's been rumored to be retiring since 2016, but seems largely disinterested in the matter. If it'll last all of 2024 remains to be seen. His administration has been a long one, but seemingly not a successful one. Only time will tell if Yamaguchi Gumi and the Yakuza survive the decade, or if they just fade away into the dark. If you liked the video, please leave a like and maybe share it with someone else who might also enjoy it. If you have a comment, feel free to leave one down below. If you liked my content a lot, you can also donate via Ko-fi or join my Patreon. Thank you for your consideration. Also, do check out my Twitch. I usually stream on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, and sometimes Sundays, typically starting at around 2 PM EST. Right now, one game I'm currently playing through is Yakuza 0, quite coincidentally. Without further ado, please check out this video. It's pretty good. Good stories only. Thank you.